Hi everybody, Amitai from Gizra here, and I guess that if you reach this part, then you're looking for the answer for the challenge. So let's go ahead and start our web application. And here it is, and let's see what we currently have on the existing master. So after I've logged in, it's redirecting me into the application. When I'm clicking on the event, I can see that there are a bunch of different events by different authors. I can start filtering by the different companies. I can start filtering by the different authors. And I can go ahead and click on the events or their equivalent marker. So our challenge is basically about having a counter next to each link, so when I click on it, it increments every time. So let's have a look at the code. So as you can see, the code, there are a bunch of different Elm files. I'm not gonna cover everything. It's not really important. Let's just concentrate on the event.elm. So basically, the event is responsible for the entire events that we are seeing. So when we're approaching a challenge as the one we have at hand, we need to start figuring out first the model. So let's have a quick look at our model in the event.elm. Our model has a list of events. Let's look at it in a second. A status, selected company, selected event, selecting author, etc., etc. But we see that the event indeed has a list of events. The event is completely arbitrary. We defined it a few lines before, and we can see that we have the ID, the label, the marker, and the author. So, a trick question. In order to have a counter on the event, what do we need to have? Not really a trick question. It's actually just a counter. And what type is it going to be? Well, probably an integer, right? Let's save it like that and let's see what Elm thinks about it. Well, it didn't like it, not one bit. And the reason is that, well, if you remember that oftentimes when we define the model, we also define how we initialize a model over here. Over here we have the event, which is an empty list, but the compiler is telling me something about the code data. Let's jump right into this line 555, and let's have a look. Oh, so the code data, this is what's actually gonna, once we call the JSON to get from the server all the data, this is what's decoding it, and Elm, as strict as it is about everything, it's also strict about how we decode the JSON. So over here we're seeing that my data right now, this event, is up until now it used to get 4 different properties, right? The ID and the label and the location and the user, and we've just added another one, which is the counter, but we do not initialize it anywhere. And the counter is actually not coming from the server, it's coming from our application. We just want to start it. So what we'll do over here, we'll simply say JSON succeed 0, meaning don't even look at the JSON, just this is the value that you should get. We see that still Elm doesn't like it. It's saying you're calling object 4 because we had 4 properties, but we actually have 5 arguments. So just gonna change it into 5, save it. All right, it's compiling. And this is how we're approaching a project. We basically want to Elm to be able to compiling all along, and we're advancing step by step. Right, so we have a counter. Do we see it on the application? Not yet. Obviously, let's just put it in the application already. Let's just jump immediately into the view. Before we start to wire it into the application or anything, let's just see that it's really there. So let's have a quick look at the view. So the view is a bunch of different, oh, you can call it HTML, but it's not really HTML. It's kind of a syntax that resembles a bit the HTML, but you can also call functions. So over here I have the view list event. So as you can see, we have right now the text event label. Let's just for convenience create a utility function. Let's call it label with counter, which will get an event as an argument, and it will have our text. So we have event label plus, let's do something like that, to string, because our event counter is an integer. plus something like that. Let's see if it satisfies the compiler. It does. All right. But we're not using it, so let's just pass it on over here. And if you click on it as well, over here as well. Let's see if it's being satisfied. Excellent. So we've just added the counter. What will happen when I'm going to click over the link? Absolutely nothing, which is great. We don't want any magic to happen. We are just showing the event counter, which is not being incremented yet. So let's talk about incrementing. So basically, when we're doing something to our model, we need to have some action that will change the stuff. So let's see how that's being done. So basically, all the actions are predefined, and this is what makes it so beautiful, that even if you don't know the application, if I would ask you what are the type of action that could be done on the event model, you don't need to read the entire code. You're just reading lines 87 to 108, and you'll tell me, hey Amitai, these are the action. And that is correct. So over here we have our select event. Here it is over here. And I could say I'll add another action. What would be, for example, a good name? Let's call it increment event counter, and it will get, let's say, an integer which would be the event ID. Now, just to make it a bit more readable, the same thing that we have company ID over here, I could define also an event ID. Again, this is like saying integer, it just makes it more explicit what I'm passing over here. So back to our action, increment event counter will get an event ID. And let's start implementing it. So let's go to the select event. Over here, when I'm selecting an event, let's add the action, and it's getting the event ID. Now, just for the sake of simplicity, again, just to make sure that everything is being compiled properly, let's just put the default model and effects none. So just to make it clear, basically, the action is responsible of changing the model. So what we're saying over here, just return the same good old model. And the effects none, what it's saying is that, well, in fact, Elm is a black box. It's completely isolated from the world. Even getting a timestamp, you need to somehow have some kind of a side effect or some kind of a task. And what we're saying here, well, when you're going to call that action, return the model, and you won't have any side effect. You're not going to do any HTTP request. You're not going to call for timestamp. So again, just going back, seeing that everything is compiled properly. So when I'm clicking right now, I'm calling the select event action, but is it calling my increment event counter? It does not, because it was not hooked anywhere. So let's do it right now. Let's say it's select event. We see the select event is doing some changes to the model, and it's calling another action. So what we want to do is call the second action. For that, we're just going to say effects batch, which basically says I can call a few tasks, a few actions, and we're just going to say task succeed, please call this increment. I'm going to do a deliberate mistake right now, we'll see it in a second, and this is translated into an effects task, whatever it means, whatever, you don't care about it. It's just gonna work. But hey, I'm gonna have a problem over here. I can see that function succeed is accepting one argument, but it was actually getting two, right? So we could easily put it in brackets like so, and it's gonna work. We actually saw the brackets earlier when we saw the label with counter. We had the brackets over here, but we can actually improve a bit the syntax. We can remove those brackets and say something like that. First, evaluate this part and then push it into text. Or we could set it differently. Evaluate this part and then type it into text. both will be working, and that's really nice because it allows us the flexibility of writing code which is readable. In the end, the fact that the compiler can read it is nice and dandy, but what's more important is that us humans can read it and understand it quickly. So, after that small detour about syntax, let's go back to our action, which is here. Here is the select event, and it's now calling also our action. Let's go back to the action, and obviously when I'm going to click it, nothing is going to happen, right? Because it's calling our action, but our action isn't returning anything different. So, what are we going to do? We're getting here the event ID, so I need to take this list of events, find my correct event, and increment the counter over there. So basically I'm going to have my events, and I'm going to put my single quote over here. This usually signifies that event is going to be updated. So event is actually going to be a list map of update event, which I haven't written yet, of model event. Basically I'm going to say event is going to be equal the list of all the events that I already have, but take all those events and pass it through a function called update event, which I'm going to write now. So update event is going to get a single event as an argument. And what we're going to do is if event ID equals event ID, then else. So if it doesn't equal, I don't need to increment anything, I just return the event itself. Otherwise, I want to update the event counter with the event counter plus 1. So over here, I still need to update my existing events, and it's going to be updated by the events with the single quote that I've just created. And let's have a look. It's being compiled, that's nice. Oh, nice, here. Now every time I'm going to click it, it's being incremented. And as I page refresh, then obviously I'm going to get 0 all over again. So just to summarize the thing, for us, the way we define the model, meaning adding that counter property, and the way that we define that we have an action, which is the single point of entry of incrementing the event counter, having that definition of the model and the action, that's the most important thing. The way we implemented it inside the action, meaning this code and the view code, in a way you could say it's just implementation details. So it really helped us thinking it in terms of, I have this model, I have this action, now how I'm going to wire it in. Thank you very much.